Welcome to the Catholic History Show. Today, we're going to discuss the last words of Henry VIII. Hope you enjoy. So I just finished Cranmer by Hilaire Belloc. Now, if you don't know who Cranmer was, I spoke about him in the last video I did on the Holy Maid of Kent. He was made Archbishop of Canterbury with the sole purpose of giving Henry VIII his divorce from Catherine of Aragon. Not our favorite person. In any event, Belloc's study of Cranmer, he relays a story of Henry VIII's death, and I was astonished when I read this quote. Quote, Thomas Cranmer knelt at the bedside and took the king's hand. In the huge mass of corrupted flesh, some breath of life still fluttered, and there are accounts of whispers from Henry's lips, which were thought to mean this or that. By one such account, he murmured, "All is lost," and by another, he muttered, "Our Lady of Walsingham." Like I said, when I read this, I was astonished. Most of the English viewers probably understand my astonishment. However, Americans might not. This past year, I was blessed enough to work on a documentary for the National Shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham in Williamsburg, Virginia. And during the course of that project, I was able to go to Walsingham, England, and see the site of the original shrine. While I was there, a local group of children were putting on a skit of the history of the shrine. At one point in the skit, all of the English kings and queens who had ever visited the shrine came down the aisle to pay homage to Our Lady. Well, when they announced Henry VIII's name, the entire crowd began to boo, and it warmed my heart because they understood what the Reformation actually was. At that moment, I realized the great difference between American Catholics and English Catholics. In America, there are no scars of the Reformation. Most Catholics here have no understanding of the cost of the Protestant Revolution. Now, I'm completely certain that not a single person in that crowd had any animus for Protestants. I'm sure they loved them as brothers and sisters. However, they recognized the true effects of what Martin Luther actually started. Which brings me back to the story from Belloc. On this channel, you will find a video I did on the story of Our Lady of Walsingham, but I'll give a quick summary of the narrative. In 1061, the Lady of the Manor in Little Walsingham received a vision of the Blessed Mother, and the Blessed Mother asked her to build the Holy House, or the house where the Annunciation took place. The saintly woman did as she was commanded, with the help of some angels. Once the house was completed, the story of it began to spread, and within a couple of generations, it began to attract pilgrims from all over. And I mean a lot of pilgrims. It was put in the care of the Augustinian priors, and a church was built over the top of the house to protect it. As it gained in popularity, the kings and queens of England started visiting it. Eventually, it became the fourth largest pilgrimage site after Jerusalem, Rome, and Compostela, and it continued for centuries until we come to the days of Henry VIII. Henry VIII was born a Catholic, and Henry VIII believed he died a Catholic. He was not born to be king, yet he ascended to the throne when his brother Arthur died. Henry was actually meant for a life in the clergy, and there is no question about his theological learning. In fact, when many of his advisors, his Protestant advisors, desired to destroy the Mass and rid the country of the pagan sacrifice, Henry refused. And not only did he refuse, he would burn people at the very suggestion of it. Regardless, Henry VIII was responsible for the destruction of the institution of the Catholic Church in England. The story goes back to the Battle of Bosworth, when the last of the Plantagenets fell, and in effect, a usurper, Henry VII, the first Tudor king, rose to the throne. Now, Henry VII was the father of Henry VIII, and by many accounts, he wasn't a very good father. But he instilled in Henry VIII the precarious situation that the Tudor monarchy was actually in. The public accepted them as kings, sure, but they needed a son. They needed an heir. And without a son, Henry believed that there would be chaos after his reign. All right, this brings us to Catherine of Aragon. She was a Spanish princess and aunt to Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. She had been married as a young girl to Henry VIII's brother, Arthur. But when Arthur died and Henry became the heir apparent, he took Catherine to be his wife, in order to maintain good relations with the Spanish. It also seems that Henry actually was truly in love with Catherine. Regardless, the first years of their marriage were seemingly wonderful. But as the years went on, Catherine didn't produce a boy. She produced a daughter, Mary, whom Henry loved, probably more than all the others. When he was with Mary, he famously doted on her, and he wasn't the only one who loved Mary. The English people loved Mary. But as I said, there was no male heir, and Henry wanted a male heir. Now, Henry was not a stupid man, nor was he an unnecessarily cruel man. You know, at moments he had great love and great joy. He had great piety and great holiness. In fact, in his quest for a male heir, Henry took his petition to Our Lady of Walsingham. He walked barefoot from East Barsham Manor, which you can actually still see today. It's only about a mile outside of town. In any event, he visited Walsingham multiple times, and I believe it is hard to deny that he had a great love for Our Lady. But Henry did have one character flaw, and that was a lack of self-control. One of the key virtues of masculinity, which separates normal men from saintly men, is discipline. Because without it, one gives away the moral authority of leadership. From a husband, to a father, to a priest, to a bishop, to a prince, to a pope. It doesn't matter. If you fail in self-discipline, you fail in your role as a leader. It's easy to judge Henry from our modern times. However, this principle largely is ignored by the West today. But Henry did lack this necessary virtue, and a clear example of this is in his promiscuity. His relationship with Anne Boleyn would be his downfall, from a loved Catholic prince to a pathetic shell. There's no doubt that Boleyn was a maniacal woman. Her casual disregard for the holiness of the marital act is shocking for her time. Her wicked hate of the church, who stood in her way of her queenship, is astonishing. And her desire for the blood of innocent Catherine and Mary is appalling. Yet Henry couldn't help himself. Perhaps, had Henry been able to fend off the wiles of such a woman, Protestantism itself would have been crushed, and the external nature of Christendom may have survived. However, as we know, Henry couldn't, and Henry fell. This, of course, leads us to his famous issue of the divorce. At first, it looked as if he might get it. However, Pope Clement at the time was under fire from the Protestants for giving such dispensations. So Henry decided to do it his own way. He had himself declared head of the church in England. Now, it's important to remember that this didn't seem all that heretical at the time. Many of the English people saw this as a reality, not because they denied the power of the Pope, but they saw it more as a both-and situation. Henry was clearly the head of the church in England because it was Henry who nominated the bishops of the land. However, Henry and his court were beginning to look at that statement differently than 9/10 of the population in England. They saw it not as a both-and situation, but an either-or. The man driving this reality was the infamous Thomas Cromwell. For many Americans, when we hear the name of Cromwell, we think of the other infamous Cromwell, named Oliver. So it's important to make the distinction. Thomas Cromwell was Henry VIII's right-hand man, and the man who would destroy forever the beauty of medieval England. Cromwell was driven by one thing, and one thing only: money. He didn't care about theology or the marriage issue of Henry, but he utilized both in order to enrich himself. In 1533, Henry got his divorce, or annulment as he liked to call it, from Boleyn's stooge Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury. In 1536, Catherine died under suspicious circumstances, and Anne believed she had won for good. However, she had a problem. She hadn't produced a male heir. And she actually had another problem. Nobody liked her. The English people despised her. They saw her as nothing more than a harlot getting rid of Catherine, their beloved queen. And as the years went on, she would verbally and sometimes physically abuse Henry. So he pretty much stopped liking her too. She was losing control. Cromwell knew it, and he saw an opportunity. He would destroy Anne Boleyn and replace her with another woman, one he could more aptly direct. So within the same year as Catherine's death, Anne Boleyn lost her head. Literally. Now, Cromwell was in complete control of the government, and he put into action his plan, which resulted in one of the greatest transfers of wealth in human history, the dissolution of the monasteries. 1538 is the date given for their fall. However, Cromwell wasn't stupid. He knew he couldn't destroy them all at once, so he took them on piecemeal. He went after the smaller ones first, or the ones that were kind of out of the way, and there wasn't too much outcry. Then he went after the bigger ones, and of course, that meant Walsingham. This is one of the greatest tragedies in Western history, not only because they destroyed some of the most wonderful devotions of the English people and ripped down some of the most beautiful buildings from the medieval age, but because they destroyed a necessary way of life. It was the monasteries that ran the hospitals and cared for the poor, that educated the populace and gave a voice to the lower classes. The monasteries were a check, an important check on civil power. Now, there's no doubt that there was corruption. Every institution, most specifically successful ones, have a problem of corruption. And it has to be rooted out, especially in a church institution. But when Cromwell destroyed the monasteries, he destroyed the safe haven that the church provided. Cromwell gave this great wealth, namely the land, to his cronies, as payoffs to go along with Henry's usurpation of papal power. He bribed the men who could have stopped Henry from taking over the church and leading England down the path of Protestantism. This is why it's interesting that one of the possible last words of Henry VIII was Walsingham. Perhaps he longed for the days of his early reign and his devotion to Our Lady. Perhaps he was sorry for the destruction of the monasteries and the England of his youth. For his soul's sake, I hope so. That brings us to the end of this story, but it's not the end of the story of Walsingham. Today in Walsingham you will find two things. One is a monument to the shipwreck and disaster of Henry VIII's reign, but two, and much more importantly, you will see a future of a Catholic England. Because when you go to Walsingham, you'll see the throngs of pilgrims coming to pray to Our Lady, and you will feel the presence of a great movement. A movement not of man, but of heaven. The people who come to Walsingham are looking for an eternal reality, which is why today the town of Little Walsingham is alive in a Christian sense. More alive than 99% of the cities in the modern West. Go to Walsingham, and you will find a remnant of the church from the Middle Age, but you'll also find a great hope for the church in the modern age. Thanks for watching, and God bless you.